Good afternoon. I want to suggest that school improvement is essential but not enough. Transformation, on the other hand, captures an ambition, the ambition for the new goals as well as means that we believe will drive education and economic development in the 21st century. Defining transformation at system level and building a program for leaders to sustain it is what I'd like to say something about now. Cisco has synthesized a body of ideas in recent times, over the last 2 or 3 years really, which we call Education 3.0. I'll say a little about that in a moment, but what's 1.0 and what's 2.0? 1.0 is the way it was, I should say really, till the final third of the 20th century. Good schools, bad schools, but little in the way of a system of schools, let alone anything that government might systematically worry its head about. 2.0, I think, is the set of ideas that became prevalent in many, many countries in the 80s through the 90s and remain important today. That emphasis on standards in literacy and numeracy, effective teaching, an investment in quality leadership and accountability, metrics, transparency. And in many ways, that is the paradigm movement of our times. 3.0? Well, 3.0's core idea is that at the center of system change should be the development of higher order capabilities for a generation of learners around the world. And then everything else needs to be aligned to support it, from the pedagogy to the metrics. What we found as we began to look at this a couple of years ago was that many of the leading school systems in the world, those who were, and according to Mike, remain, right at the top of the PISA table, many of those systems were beginning to think, what next? And to identify with this particular set of ideas, though often behind closed doors. Our task has been to take the debate out from behind the closed doors and bring it at least into a succession of antechambers. Here's the argument in slightly greater detail. Whether it's curriculum, or teaching and learning, or assessment, it needs above all to bring through the skills to solve complex problems, sometimes the most complex problems, often working in teams, sometimes international teams, manipulating discipline-based knowledge. Swinging in behind, well, building designs, the technology infrastructure, culture, leadership, and certainly the critical 2.0 reforms that I just mentioned, which I think need to be adapted to support this more ambitious agenda. And 2 essential enablers: connectivity, wherever you go, much as we just heard about in relation to Jamaica, and extraordinarily effective continuous professional development. In our experience, those 2 things together, though by no means enough, are really vital to taking forward this kind of program. Over the last 3 years, I've had the opportunity to work with Cisco in a number of countries, really to try this out. In the USA, on the Gulf Coast, following Katrina, the schools of Mississippi and Louisiana, but also in New York City. In China, again, tragically, following disaster, the Sichuan earthquake of 2 years ago, and in Mexico. We've tested the approach. I think we've gone some way to prove it. We've certainly learned an awful lot of lessons. And I would summarize what we've learned in these terms: that effective change is holistic change. It isn't enough to pull one lever, wait for 5 years and pull the next and see how you're going. These levers do need to be pulled in some sort of intelligent sequence. That at the heart of it is a historic transfer of ownership of the educational process from teachers to learners, which in no way does away with teachers. They become more critical than ever, just as we were hearing in terms of Indonesia. But there is a transfer of ownership a new centrality for the learner. We think that all of these things are accelerated by collaborative learning technologies which support a more collaborative approach to teaching and learning. And it does require a system approach, thinking about the relationships between the parts over time and how they move. In 2009, Cisco, with a number of partners, including the Gates, Hay, Harvard, McKinsey, established the Global Education Leaders Program, or GELP. GELP is a global movement for change, driven by the power of ideas, and its purpose is to engage the people, the leaders of some of the boldest and most inspirational education systems in the world, to see whether we can make these ideas work at scale. It's comprised of a coalition of senior system leaders, policymakers, thought leaders, consultants, committed to the vision of Education 3.0, to developing transformational leadership skills to drive the agenda, to implementing change in local and national systems, and expanding the vision and those practices towards a global movement. So not much that's modest there. However, over a period of now 15 to 16 months, the jurisdictions that have come together to think about this challenge, and I'll name them in a moment, have identified a small number of absolutely critical propositions, which is not so much about the what of Education 3.0. We can see what that is. It's the much more difficult how. How do you do this at scale? The first proposition is the criticality of the leadership. And there seems to have been so much emphasis properly placed at education policymaker level, certainly Director General of Schools level, and indeed at the front line, head teachers, principals. We are particularly interested in the people in the middle, running major systems. It might be at state or city level. But it's clear to us that to be successful, they need to communicate powerful ideas, to have a narrative, to be passionate, and to be pretty cute politically, because the cycle of political change now seems to outstrip even the cycle of business change. And often you are asking, how can we support change from a business proposition, even as political leaders cycle through? We think that transformational innovations need to be focused not on the technologies. Surely we can take the technologies these days for granted, but rather on the processes, and often the one-to-one, the personal relationships that underpin learning. And we're quite convinced that you have to find the safe spaces, spaces licensed at the margins of the current system, championed by system leaders and authorized to innovate on behalf of the system itself. So, working with the first two cohorts of participating systems, we've seen a hugely important difference emerge. Some, of course, while introducing aspects of transformation, really want to stay the course with the improvement paradigm that served us so well. Ontario and Victoria in Australia, I think, would fall into that category. Others want to adopt the transformation paradigm more fully. New York City is one, but so is South Korea, and so is Finland. And if they want to move, and we gather from Mike Baker that they're in the top 3 again in PISA this time, it's telling us something about the game that we're all playing. It's fine to be top of one game. Would it be better to think about the next game that we need to lead in? Now, within that more transformational category, we see some significantly different contexts, which of course prompt different strategies. For example, you'll find a very, very different problem around engagement if you look at New York as opposed to Korea. In New York, many of the students, not all, but many of the students are undermotivated. In Korea, you might almost say it's the opposite. There is a drivenness that can be counterproductive. Of course, there's a very different attitude you may find in one country to another in terms of public support and parental expectations. And finally, very, very different approaches to devolution as opposed to centralization. And that, in turn, is, as I say, throwing up different approaches to this transformational journey. So New York is looking at a split-screen approach. You continue to pursue improvement, but you grow the disruptive innovations from within, first within an iSchool, then within an iZone, then you spread that out across the school base. Finland, I think, is identifying and amplifying radical innovations as they emerge, and then applying knowledge management strategies to scaling them up, whereas Korea is focusing really on diversifying the means of assessing skills and maybe undermining the almost rigid grip of current assessments on the system. So I want to end just by saying something more about assessment. Because we think you can put in place a process for transforming the system. You can even develop a cadre of leaders who push it all along. But if the way we assess learners remains traditional and unchanged, we will quickly get stuck. That's why, with partners in Microsoft and Intel, we've developed ATC21S, the Assessment and Teaching for 21st Century Skills program. And we have a number of pilot countries, including Singapore, Finland, Australia, and the US. What we're doing is designing practical technology-based assessments for two areas: complex problem-solving in teams and social learning within a digital environment. And it will lead, if it works, and we're still at least a year away from the finish, to a technical toolkit to apply these assessments in a system and a policymaker's manual. I'm delighted to say that the international assessment bodies are fully engaged with this work, including the OECD. So it seems a good day, and I'll end here, by quoting Andreas Schleicher, whom you will all know leads the PISA program, but is working to move the program in the direction that I've described. He says, "The reproduction of subject matter content, traditional strengths of schooling, is increasingly automated and digitized. It follows that individuals will derive their competitive advantage from their ability to extrapolate from what they know today and apply their knowledge in novel situations. And collaborative skills will be critical. In the flat world, everything that is our own proprietary knowledge today will be a commodity, available to everyone tomorrow. We're seeing a shift from the world of stocks, with knowledge stocked up somewhere, depreciating rapidly in value, to a world in which the enriching power of communication and collaboration flows is increasing." So, transformational change, system leadership, and a bold approach to assessment. Thank you very much.